to WNHH Radio's Dateline New Haven. I'm your host, Paul Bass, inviting you to join me on an exploration of what makes the Elm City tick. Sten Vermund helps make New Haven tick. He's the dean of the Yale School of Public Health. And he's here in the WNHH studio to shine some light on, among other topics, guns, pills, and sofas. And thanks to Yale New Haven Hospital for providing support for today's program. Thanks for coming in, Dean Vermund. It's such a nice opportunity to meet you.
Pleasure, Paul. Thanks.
And before I get to those topics of guns, pills, and sofas, which you'll find out quickly has a lot to do with issues that affect all of us right now in the news, I want to ask you about two items in the headlines that involve public health. You know, we're kind of right now a little bit inured to what's the daily outrages and the fears that are in the news and stuff that outrages you. But I read something yesterday that outraged me more than any story in a long time. It just got me so angry and upset. And that was what's happening with the World Health Organization. That for years there's been this consensus worldwide that it's better for babies to have breast milk. Not that every baby can have breast milk. There are reasons you can't sometimes. But that there's no question from anyone in any ideological background and anyone who cares about the issue, and maybe you're going to correct me on this, that we should promote the idea of people having breastfeeding their kids and not having companies that make money off of formula lie to them or mislead them or prevent them from hearing the scientific truth so that we can make sure a lot of these babies don't get viral diseases. At the World Health Organization, they're about to pass a resolution that would just say we call on everyone to know this information and not have companies market under false information. And not only did the Trump administration oppose it, but on behalf of this industry that makes billions of dollars off of preventing kids from getting the nutrition they need by promoting formula, they actually threatened the countries that were going to introduce it, Ecuador first of all. And they said they were going to withdraw military aid and enact trade sanctions if they introduce this non-binding resolution. And the hilarious part is that it took Russia to introduce it because Trump's scared of them, so they won't threaten them. Are you seeing it the way I do? Because you understand this stuff. I mean, this is a public health issue. Does it look that way to you?
Paul, you've been very articulate. I actually have, the only thing I think I have to add is a bit of a historic perspective.
So is that true?
It is all true. Everything you said is
journalism.
true. No.
Those aren't written by public health people.
Everything you say is true. And it was July 1977. I was starting my internship in pediatrics at Columbia.
So this is your
this
oh my
field,
gosh, this is your
Columbia
area.
Presbyterian Medical Center. And that was the beginning of the InFact movement, which was a Nestle boycott. And Nestle had this bad habit of dressing up their saleswomen as if they were nurses and having them give free formula to new mothers
to try to get them used to that
in developing country hospitals. So the mothers who would then be encouraged not to breastfeed would then become customers of the formula. And there were abundant vignettes of malnourished children because the mothers couldn't afford the formula, so they would dilute it. Instead of putting a tablespoon, they would put a teaspoon. Sometimes it was so bad that they would just color the water white to give it the impression that it was milk. And the babies were coming in with kwashiorkor and marasmus, two severe malnourished.
That's evil.
It's very evil. And so what happened was we mobilized, and the InFact movement you can read about on the internet was very successful. And by the time I had morphed from full-time pediatrician to part-time pediatrician and part-time public health professional by about 83, there was an agreement with Nestle that they signed and voluntarily agreed to change their marketing practices, and the boycott was stopped. But in between that 77 to 83 period, 1981, there was a carefully negotiated breastfeeding and infant nutrition agreement with the formula manufacturers. It was being negotiated with all the formula manufacturers. And this had been carefully negotiated by the Carter administration. Well, in the first months of the Reagan administration, the U.S. Voted no.
Now, is there a legitimate?
So we've been through this before.
And is there a legitimate conservative argument? Because on a lot of issues that liberals, I'm assuming you might be in that camp, get outraged at Trump. Often there is a legitimate conservative argument whether or not that's their real motivation. I read the story and all I saw, because I know sometimes it is true. I know from personal experience that there are people who just can't breastfeed, so it's good that the formula's there, or supplements if they have weak milk, or if the mother just can't breastfeed, it's better than nothing. But I didn't see any real argument on the other side. Is there any argument for not letting companies?
There's no argument. This was a pro-breastfeeding resolution that the World Health Assembly, the WHO, would promulgate breastfeeding as the first choice healthy.
And wasn't it also
alternative.
saying that it was calling on companies not to mislead people?
Correct. So we're simply rewinding the clock back to 37 years ago. We have yet another administration that has decided to advocate for formula rather than breast milk. We think it's an important and compelling issue for Americans, too, because we know that the breastfed baby is less likely to grow up to be obese than the formula-fed baby, is less likely to be overfed, which is a problem that we have in this country. So in the lowest income countries, we need them breastfed so they don't become undernourished.
And
in the high income countries, we need them breastfed so they don't become overnourished.
That's so interesting.
It's best for everybody.
Also, and I don't know if this was true when you were beginning in the movement with InFact, isn't there an issue about viral diseases? Because that's been a big part of what the public health community is dealing with, especially in the third world, or there's Ebola or other outbreaks. Is it my understanding correct that having breast milk makes you much less likely as a baby to be susceptible to those?
Yeah, breast milk is a miracle beverage. Breast milk has antibodies from the mother that help protect the baby. It also has immunologic cells from the mother that help protect the baby. And our evidence is overwhelming from a decade, you could say 30 years of research in breast milk immunology, that not only is breast milk the perfectly balanced food for an infant, and that's what the formula manufacturers mimic. They mimic breast milk as best they can. And it has immunologic properties that formula cannot
And isn't it
reproduce.
also true that another mother's breast milk is not as effective as the birth mother's breast milk? That isn't it something about the genetic makeup or the biology of the mother and her own child that makes that a perfectly tailored source of nutrition?
It's probably less important than the breast milk versus not breast milk
really?
issue. Yeah,
Oh, really?
and there is this historic tradition that wealthy women had wet nurses. So
Right,
they
but
wouldn't-
was that
wouldn't
as
be
good
trouble.
as having the...
It may not have been as good, but it was certainly better than any alternative would have been.
So let me ask how you feel as a public health professional. I hadn't realized you had this whole history with it. You've been at the beginning of this movement.
Yeah.
You dedicate your life to have science and public health work help people's lives, other people's lives in the public sphere.
When I read about this, I was literally sickened. I mean, I felt like I had a kick to the gut because I thought we were 35 years past this. This is the formula manufacturers have been better corporate citizens in recent years, and why they should be encouraged to backslide by official U.S. government policy to discourage the World Health Assembly and the World Health Organization from adopting a very thoughtful and reasonable pro-breastfeeding approach is an absolute mystery.
But I thought the Republican base was partly the Christian right. I know partly it's help corporations make as much money as they can, whether even if they're going to kill us by polluting our water or the coal mines being kept going. But this seemed a little different to me. I mean, how much money is at stake?
The formula manufacturers have had a leveling of their profit margins and their sales.
I thought they were still looking at a 3% growth in profits next year.
Yeah, but that's considered a leveling in their business. They'd like to see 5%, 10%. They'd like to do better than population growth, and they'd like to expand their markets. So there are forces within that industry very few of whom have my institutional memory on the issue, by the way, because they weren't around necessarily 35 years ago. So they're being re-educated as to how angry those of us in the population of the United States can get on a matter like
And you said this is cyclical. Has there ever been a tactic before of threatening a loss of military aid and new trade sanctions on a country purely for introducing a non-binding resolution on science?
I think this happens more than we realize.
Oh, you
I
saw
think
this? You
I
don't
think the
this is a-
U.S.
okay.
I think the U.S. is fully capable of bullying other countries.
Oh, yeah,
There's an
yeah.
old phrase that when the United States sneezes, Latin America gets a cold. And I think although a lot of Americans, we were not a major colonial power, so we didn't have colonies the way that Britain or France or Portugal had, or Spain had
Oh, now
colonies.
you're talking about like
But we-
for United Fruit and our policy toward Latin America. And the death
Precisely.
squads,
We
yeah.
have our economic power, so we may not have been the political power such that these countries were our legal colony, but they've been our economic colonies for a long time. And I think much of the current administration's strategy is bullying. The entire trade policy has to do with trying to bully countries into doing things our way. And they're, in a different place now than they were 50 years ago.
So why
and they're
did-
not
why
they're
did
not going to be
Russia-
bullied. They're
why
be fighting back.
And this might be more of a political question. Russia saved the day yesterday. Is that because they wanted to keep the world confused
Yeah.
about whose sides they're on and get some good press at the same?
Russia is not always the bad guy in public health. They were the ones who proposed in the 1950s that we try to eradicate the world from smallpox, which
they're
in
also
the middle of the
deadly-
Cold War,
Yeah.
the U.S. agreed with them, and we
Wow.
forged a grand alliance, and we did succeed at eradicating the world from smallpox. So Russia can be enlightened on public health issues when it chooses to be. And I think in this case, Russia must have something on our president, because our president capitulates at every turn when Russia makes a statement.
You think it's as simple as a PP tape or something bigger?
Who knows? But this is beyond my scope. I'm not a political scientist, but I am amazed at how we can stand up to almost any country in the world except for Russia.
But you are a leading public health advocate, so you were sickened by this news yesterday.
I was.
But what do you do about it? Because we do
Well,
depend on people like you to deal with issues like
I
this.
sent a letter to the New York Times. I certainly feel like,
That's step one.
well, I
Although
certainly
the
feel,
audience might not be the...
well, and I'm revitalizing my attention to this issue because there is, in fact, an incipient and expanding boycott movement again.
Oh.
It's spearheaded by a consortium led by a group in Great Britain, and I'm looking into that to see if I ought to mobilize the forces and join the forces again, because I thought we were done with this. I thought that the formula manufacturers had woken up and smelled the coffee and recognized
But
that
instead they smelled the
unethical
breast
practice. Yeah, and recognized that unethical practices are not the way to sell their product, and that they had a plenty big market just with women who chose not to breastfeed, could afford not to breastfeed, or needed to avoid breastfeeding for some other reason, and or unsuccessful breastfeeding. So there's a plenty big market for formula without being unethical in the marketing.
What can a public health advocate or researcher or dean do? So you talked about writing a letter to the Times. You talked about joining a movement. Is it about producing credible research?
Yeah.
Is
So-
that the main issue? The main
On this
role?
particular topic, the research is overwhelming. On this particular topic, we have such compelling clinical, biological, immunological evidence of the benefits of breast milk that certainly there's additional research that can be done, but the fundamental question is answered. Breast milk is a superior product to feed a child, a newborn child, and that is without question.
So it's about speaking up.
I
then.
think it has to do with advocacy and communication. So we have been working with a Yale alumnus out in San Francisco who is interested in supporting a competition at our school. And at the Yale School of Public Health, we're going to launch in the fall a 1 to 2 minute video competition where students are going to make a brief video about a compelling public health issue of our time. And the goal will be to either target the lay public as their audience, or target policymakers and politicians as their targets. So we don't care which group they target, but we want to target both. And see if we can communicate sometimes complex public health messages in a way that lay audiences and or policymakers can understand. Because I think this is one of our great failings, possibly in academia in general, but certainly in public health in particular, that we're not effectively communicating. Why are so many parents rejecting vaccines for their children? Why are is there so much support for environmental degradation through the policies of the Pruitt EPA? Why are there not more sentiments in favor of alternative energy sources and battling global warming? The fact that we don't have 70, 80, 90% of the populace in favor of protect our environment, in favor of reducing the risks to our grandchildren from global warming, in favor of protecting our children from suboptimal nutrition, as in the case with breastfeeding or in the case of avoiding vaccination. So we're failing. We're not reaching out to the public in an effective way, and we need to redouble our efforts in that regard.
May I offer a theory on that?
Please.
That the right, funded by Scaife and those kind of people, in the 1970s, they watched Ralph Nader mobilize citizen groups to get a lot of people behind science, and whether it's environmental regulation, car safety, you name it. They saw how effective it was by creating those groups and having a message that was sent through, in those days, op-ed articles and appearances on media. So they spent 10 times as much money creating their own networks of groups that would advocate for what big corporations wanted to see happen with the environment, less regulation and issues like that. And then they developed generations of people who were very skilled at communicating those ideas, either through right-wing media outlets that started on college campuses to what today are Fox News and Breitbart, which are basically convincing people that it's experts against them, that people like you, Dean, are not like them, and that you want to hurt them and take away their jobs and tell them how to live their life through fake science. And they can pay, those same people can pay for studies that say it's great to drink breast milk, formula. I don't know, any thoughts on that?
Well, there are a host of conservative activists who have a book that liberals rarely read anymore, by Saul Alinsky.
Yep.
Anatomy of a Radical. Do you remember the name of it?
Radicals.
Something, yeah. Anyway.
4 Radicals, yeah.
And it was a book written in the early 60s by a left-wing labor and community organizer that was all about community organization. And this is required reading in a number of conservative circles.
Really?
Because of how effectively it argues the need for community mobilization.
And look what's happened is at Cincinnati with, and I'm sure this got on your radar, they had, was it a light rail system that the whole city voted for? And then
Nashville,
the Koch brothers,
Nashville. My old hometown.
And then Koch brothers did a group that, a citizen group that went out and convinced the
correct
city to go against it.
So I feel like community mobilization and public education strategies that were used by the left in the 60s, now used by the right in the 2000s. These are effective strategies. You can mobilize communities for effective political action. The best example of that was Hillary Clinton losing the election, Donald Trump winning the election. And in those 12 or so swing states, the Trump folks did a heck of a job in community organizing, bringing out their vote, and demonizing the opposition.
Which Alinsky did too.
Which Alinsky did too. So I feel like we who are public health advocates, looking to buck up social needs and improve people's ability to get jobs and improve people's ability to be housed, to cope with their demons, be it mental health or substance use, whatever it is. that if we could forge a grand alliance with a subset of conservatives who actually basically agree with that.
Man, family conservatives, evangelicals,
That's right.
they don't. So anything.
Well, this breast milk argument, if I wanted to put my old Norwegian Lutheran hat on, I could argue that breast milk is God's creation, is God's gift to children. Yeah, absolutely. And I think the Judeo-Christian traditions, Hinduism, Islam, all of them would see breast milk as a creation of God. And one could forge an alliance around the importance of healthy feeding of newborns, and that doesn't have to be a political issue. Climate change does not have to be a political issue. Do we really want more contamination of our streams, of our air? Is this conservatism? Isn't conservatism to conserve, and isn't Mother Earth part of what we're trying to conserve? So we just need to improve our vocabulary. There's been a very interesting program that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has spearheaded around the issue of family planning. And they've done surveys and found that conservative groups are on balance negative towards the concept of family planning. They equate family planning with abortion. If, on the other hand, you talk to conservative groups about contraception, right, there's a net positive response to the concept of contraception. And a common response is, well, yeah, I practice contraception.
Does that skew younger too? Are the numbers greater younger?
There are some older younger differences on that particular topic, with older folks being more negative about family planning, younger folks being more tolerant. And then if you talk about birth spacing, and you sort of talk about the context of a developing country where you're going to have a malnourished child if you have a child every year because the parents simply don't have the resources from their subsistence farm to be able to feed all these children. So you say, well, if you empower a woman in a low income setting, say in Africa, Asia, Latin America, to space her children to every 3-4 years, the vast majority of conservatives are in favor of this.
Really?
So sometimes it's our vocabulary and our ability to communicate what we mean. I was driving into work today listening to the radio, and I heard an anti-Trump diatribe, which sounded very unfortunately worded. I just felt like the same thing could have been said in a way that potentially would reach out to people who are on the fence or borderline supporting Donald Trump and make them rethink what the issues are. And I think that those sorts of communication messages and engaging independents, engaging traditional conservatives, not Trump conservatives who tend to be very paranoid, very defensive. Just the fact that I would even speak ill of Trump means that I'm against Trump, which I'm not. He's the president of the United States. I would like him to succeed, but I would also like him to succeed on an agenda which is going to improve the public's health.
What can our listeners and readers do today or tomorrow on this breast milk issue?
The sentiment of the Connecticut congressional delegation is overwhelmingly in favor of what you, Paul, and I have been saying. I'm sure they're happy to hear from their constituents. But I think that this is an opportunity to tap into other ties. Let's say that you have a cousin in Oklahoma. You send a note to the Oklahoma legislator in Congress, citing that your cousin's district is this district. I will send notes to Tennessee politicians because I lived there for the last 12 years before moving to New Haven. I think we want to reach out to a broader constituency. I think letting the White House know that this is seen as unacceptable, a letter to the local newspaper, a letter to a local blog, a particular organization one belongs to. I think it's an important and compelling issue not to let our government get away with an anti-breastfeeding stand at the World Health Assembly. That, to me, is vital that they get the message that this is unacceptable.
And we're going to give you the message to remind you that you're listening to Dateline New Haven on WNHH-FM, live streamed at newhaven.org. We have the pleasure today of chatting with Sten Vermund, the Dean of the Yale School of Public Health, who has 3 words that summarize some of the biggest public health challenges of our day: guns, pills, and sofas. I obviously went first to sofas because I was wondering what issue that was. And that appeared to be epidemic of obesity tied in with diagnosed diabetes. So what is the connection between those two, and what's wrong with sofas?
Oh, sofas is just a cutesy term for the sedentary lifestyle.
Actually, I prefer to lie down in the sofa.
So the sedentary lifestyle is plaguing us. There are many school districts in the United States that have been cutting their school budgets, and some of the first things that are cut in large swaths of the United States are art, music, and gym class. And I was in Alabama for 11 years of my life. The local high school's gymnasium was shut down for the entire 11 years that I lived in Alabama. The public high school that was in my neighborhood did not have a gymnasium because of asbestos, and they could not remediate it because they didn't have the tax base and didn't have the money to remediate. Nobody was going to pay for it. So they did not have gym class, and they basically cut the gym program. So here in this formative high school years, a lot of people have their growth spurts. They might have a weight problem as a youth. They might be able to overcome it if they're active enough and they have proper diets. And we had their gym class closed. A lot of schools, with the pressure of the workday, have cut out recess. So I took recess for granted. I had my 40 minutes of recess every single day my whole childhood, and I ran up and down that courtyard.
Where was that?
That was in Madison, Wisconsin. And I was a very active outdoors kind of kid. And we had gym class in the winter, recess in the wintertime. We had gym class 3 times a week. We had after-school sports activities. So fast forward to the modern era, and we may be a little bit spoiled in Connecticut, where we have high property taxes and better schools as a consequence.
Now, in New Haven, we have a $20 million school deficit. We're going to be cutting pretty big time. We got
and I hope that they don't cut gym class, and I hope that they don't cut after-school activities, because keeping our youth active and our adults active, having them walk rather than ride, having them engaged in outdoor sports, indoor sports, depending on the time of year, is vital. And if we're going to sit on sofas and watch TV and play video games, we're not going to burn the calories we need to cope with a very unfortunate change in our dietary patterns, and that is towards the fast food movement. There are plenty of food deserts. You've probably your listeners have heard that phrase.
We've had on the group that did the surveys that we have people are, to begin with, food insecure, meaning they're at least part of the month they have choosing food and rent.
Exactly.
In a whole lot of neighborhoods in town, and that those often, but not always, correspond to places where there's no place to buy regular groceries.
And fast food and processed food is often cheaper than fresh fruits and vegetables. So we have people economically disincentivized from eating well. Sometimes they don't have the foods available in their local market. And
so who's getting hit hardest by this, and where?
Well, not surprisingly, if you go back 100 years, you were more likely to be overweight and obese if you were wealthy. If you fast forward to the modern era, you're more likely to be overweight and obese if you're not wealthy. And so we have a movement of exercise and clubs and Pilates that are all more likely to be taken advantage of by the upper middle class.
And they can also afford more healthful food.
And they can afford more healthful food, and their markets play to their
Because I'm close to some
desires.
people on food stamps, and we look at it. You can't buy a carrot in the latter part of the month. You can't, you can get box macaroni and cheese. You can get some canned veggies. Yeah. Yep. But you can't buy, you need to find some other way to get kale or fresh apple.
So we have the perfect storm for a cardiovascular disease and diabetes epidemic, because if you go back about 35 years ago, There was no state in the United States that had more than 15% of its population as obese. Today, you have no state with under 25% of its population as obese.
Have we changed the definition of obese?
No, it's been the same. Body mass index of 30, which is the weight in kilos by the height in
Because I always had a
meters.
completely non-scientific theory that part of what's making people fat is worrying so much about being fat.
Well, psychology is a big
and
part
being preyed on
of.
by an industry that wants them on these diets that get you skinny for a while and buy their products, but then you revert.
Well, I think any clinician would agree that a long-term balanced diet, which does not overfeed, with a long-term balanced exercise regimen is the way to go. It becomes a lifestyle more than a transient effort. I myself have been a bit overweight for the last 20 years. And this may sound silly, but I said, well, if I'm going to be dean of the School of Public Health at Yale, I should be normal weight. So I decided to do something about it more vigorously than I had before.
What'd you do?
And I needed to lose about 10 pounds. Well, what I found worked for me was portion size.
It's a biggie.
The
plate in America's gotten bigger.
I always overate.
Yeah, me too.
And I sort of, my mom said, finish your plate. That was kind of the
But the plate got
philosophy.
bigger.
The plate got bigger. The portions got bigger.
Yeah.
So when I go to a restaurant, I will take a little piece home for lunch next day. And I've gotten very aggressive on that. So when I feel, I try to eat more slowly. I try to chew my food more. I try to drink more water. And so when I become sated or full, I then don't push myself to finish my meal. Either leave it on the plate or take it home for lunch next day.
The food companies have scientists that how to manipulate your need to feel full, so that you'll buy more of certain kinds of foods that aren't
But
good for you.
they can't manipulate.
Yeah.
They can't manipulate the more natural products. So, trying to eat less processed foods, rather than Velveeta, you actually have real cheese. Rather than Spam, you have real meat. Rather than Captain D's greasy, oily fish, you have real fish. Rather than canned, salted vegetables, you have real vegetables. If you can manage that, you can substantially control your own destiny in terms of salt and sugar.
So in your last one you mentioned was the first thing I, as a vegan, can make a decision on. What I loved in your presentation about this, you looked at the role of Big Tobacco buying a lot of these food companies and promoting the fast food, and you listed some of the cereals that were launched in 2017. Frosted Krispies, Girl Scouts Caramel Crunch, Sprinkled Donut Crunch, Chocolate Cheerios, by the same companies that made those. Why is that happening? Why are we having donut cereal for lunch and breakfast?
The companies have fairly substantial research arms, and they are looking for what is appealing to consumers. Salt and sugar are often appealing to consumers. So if you can optimize salt to maximize the tastiness and attractiveness of your product, then more of your product will be bought. If you can optimize sugar to be most appealing to your target market, be it children or adults, then perhaps more of that product will be bought. So we have a conflict between public health needs and what's preferable for the broader community with what might be better for a particular industry. And so we need to engage that industry in dialogue. We need to pressure that industry with our purchasing patterns. We need to educate our consumers. We're proud of some of the work that the Yale School of Public Health, Griffin Hospital over in Derby, Prevention Research Center is doing. And we have a number of faculty at the School of Public Health, as well as capable doctors in the Griffin Hospital, who are engaged in this agenda of trying to combine activism with education, and try to achieve some structural improvements in our society by educating the small store owner, shopkeeper, bodega owner about how they can actually make money
Now, you know that
with bananas and
that experiment didn't really work that well in New Haven. I think the public health school was part of it. It was a great experiment.
yes,
They picked a bunch of bodegas and small
yes,
convenience stores, and they gave them displays to put up front,
right.
incentives to put bananas and stuff up front. And it pretty much everyone we followed up with a year later, with one big example in the Hill that did very well, nearest to your public health school on Congress Avenue.
Mhm.
They all had put like the lone banana in the back, and it was back to junk all around. Why is that? Why did that
This
not work?
has to be a persisting. We had a much greater success at this in Nashville for reasons that I need to research. This is not one off. This is something that should be a persistent effort. There should be activists in communities that are persistently demanding good quality products at the checkout line. We should be coaching our store owners how they can actually make money by selling healthy products. It can't be a one-off. It has to be a city policy. It has to be part of our continuing dialogue.
What else
with
can the
our
city of New
community.
Haven do, like with school luncheons, for instance? What can we do to fight back against the epidemic of obesity and diabetes?
Well, school lunches are a major offender, honestly, as we cut back funding for public schools, which has happened in so many different venues. The quality of school lunches often goes down. You can buy poor quality, salty hot dogs at very low cost. You can buy poor quality, salty macaroni and cheese at very low cost. So some of the cheapest foods are some of the least healthy foods.
And also the kids don't
parents-
want them. I mean, to some extent, the experiments we had in New
Well-
Haven schools. Now, sometimes I remember when my kids were public school age, they would get like in the breakfast frozen juice. It was juice we were
Mhm,
hearing is not good for you. 10 teaspoons of sugar, according to the latest
Mhm,
article I read in the regular juice serving. But
mhm.
they would have frozen apples.
Yeah.
Like the kids would just throw them in the garbage. But they do like the junkier. They will gravitate
Well,
toward the
you know,
junkier.
let's go. I would urge you to invite Amelia Reese Masterson on your program. She's a Yale School of Public Health graduate with her Master of Public Health, and she's the head of City Seed, which is over here
Yep.
on Grant. And
Grand Ave, yeah.
City Seed is working with immigrant families who are starting restaurants, working with school programs that are looking at tasty, healthy foods. You know, we have groups in town that are quite expert.
We sure do. We have
at
a whole
this
food
issue,
justice.
and
Food
that's
justice.
right. And
know, and
we
obviously
need
the
to
whole-
mobilize the expertise from these groups to try to improve our school lunches.
And I'm sure parents too at home, like my kids grew up, they never forget that I told them that carrots were dessert. They didn't know for like 4 years there were other kinds of desserts. But you know, in their 20s, they're eating completely healthful diets. You know, vegetarian diets. So I wonder if anything, if part of the efforts need to be focused on what parents are going to feed their kids.
Well, I raised, my wife and I raised two sons, now in their 30s. And one of them, they both loved the McDonald's as kids, and we try to restrict their options. We'd drive by a McDonald's, and we'd say, well, look over to the left. Look what an interesting car that is, just so they wouldn't see the McDonald's and drive us crazy. I'm sure every parent has a story like this. But the reality is that as they matured and became adults, our older son, who's an optometrist here in town, he adopted a very healthy diet, and he is eating very, very well. And our younger son, who lives in Florida and works for the Disney Corporation, is still very fond of unhealthy food. So I don't say this with any sort of arrogance or I told you so. I say it with all due modesty. It's not
Yeah.
easy for a parent to be up against the fast food and processed food.
Let me give you a great dilemma. Okay, and you probably followed this if you look at the New Haven Independent. We brought bike share to New Haven,
Yeah,
where people can rent
Yeah.
bikes and just take them from location to location, leave them there.
oh, it's remarkable.
There was no tax money for it, so we had to do advertising. So we rolled it out earlier this year, and most of the ads were McDonald's. So some people said, what kind of
Ironic.
message you're giving? Right next to a school, you're putting a big McDonald's billboard, and then you're saying, but we're going to make people healthier by having them ride the bikes. Haven't you done more harm? But the other side said, this is the real world. We want to have this program. We don't have any money. Someone's got to pay for the ads. Is it the right call?
Boy, that's a tough one. I'm a tennis player from my youth, and now I'm following Wimbledon because we're right in the middle of Wimbledon. And I remember with great ambivalence
Virginia Slims?
the Virginia Slims story.
Oh, my God.
Where some of our heroic leaders of women's sports, like Billie Jean King, drank the Kool-Aid and signed on, the women's tennis players signed on with a cigarette manufacturer to sponsor the women's tennis tour.
And You've Come a Long Way, Baby was the campaign.
You Came a Long Way, Baby, to encourage women to smoke. And we have a lot of Faustian bargains that we're making to try to do the right thing. Even the tobacco settlements with over 30 states in the United States, where the tobacco industry gave billions of dollars of restitution money to the states that were suing them to settle the lawsuits. And billions of dollars went from the profits of cigarettes to states, and most of those states use those programs for public health. And many of them use them for tobacco cessation. So here, tobacco profit money was coming to help states with tobacco cessation programs. So I'm not clever enough to answer your question. I think that we live in a very complex world, and I think that we should avoid conflicts of interest as best we can, which is what we try to do at Yale. But sometimes there's a gray zone, and it's hard to interpret. We have funds in American academia, for example, that have founded entire universities that are based on the slave trade from 300 years ago. We have universities that were founded on the steel industry that was paying its workers inhumanly low wages and putting them in very serious risk of their lives in unsafe working conditions. We have the robber barons who are exploiting Chinese immigrants. I mean, there's a lot of dirty money supporting good things in America, and I don't have a glib answer to your point.
No, we're not talking glib. We're talking public health in depth here on WNHH's Dateline New Haven with the dean of Yale's Public Health School, one of the great institutions in New Haven, been very much a part of our community. But, you know, we're thinking of projects like the Needle Exchange, which thanks to the research done there became a national phenomenon in cities, and that saved a lot of lives, that down to doing the surveys in our neighborhoods about people's health and where they buy their food. And Sten Vermund is the dean of the Yale School of Public Health. Dirty money, Faustian bargains. You brought up who founded a university whose name is on it. To me, and Eric Mastiano Sr. says, good morning, Dean Vermund. And Vasilis Vasilou also gives a thumbs up to what you're saying. And I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. Thanks for listening to WNHH-FM. The more interesting to me, Faustian bargain for a public health school isn't whose name is on the door, although that matters. But don't forget, Joan Kroc has supported all these good causes with the money she got from McDonald's, and Betsy DeVos comes from a family that took like dirty money through Amway and put it to dirty uses, so it can go either way. But the bigger challenge for you is where your money comes from for the study. And people, you know, a lot of times companies, like breast milk companies, formula companies, want to give money for studies they're going to have the right answer, and the academics don't even have to be told. They know if they want to get the money, they can't touch certain results if they want to keep getting the money. Have you seen that in your industry? Have you ever had to make a call like that?
I've been in academia for 35 years, and the opportunities to compromise one's integrity are there every single day. We've, I think, done very well at the Yale School of Public Health. We are largely funded by the American taxpayer through the National Institutes of Health, through the tuition money of our students, through endowment money from our donors.
What about when a donor says, I want you to do a study on X? Do you have rules for how to make sure that it's clearly understood this is going to be independently done?
If a contract is signed by the School of Public Health leadership, myself and others, and it has restrictions on publication of findings, we will not sign that contract.
Excellent. Now, what about when it's just kind of a wink? If you know that a tobacco company is giving you money for a smoking study, first of all, has that happened, and how would you deal with it?
We do not accept funds from the tobacco industry. We are faced with an interesting situation right now where Philip Morris, one of the largest tobacco companies, has given $1 billion to start a foundation for a Smoke-Free World. That's the name of it.
Really?
And this foundation is an independent foundation, and they're going to be making research grant awards independently with the general theme of smoke and tobacco reduction.
Now, is the game
so there's
plan
an
there?
example where it's an ambiguity, where
So the big
money
issue there, yeah. So
came
the
from-
issue there might not be that they'd restrict your findings, although I don't know if that's true. It might be that they want you to do this, so that their larger goal might be either to polish their image so they'll make more profits otherwise and have governments not restrict them, or they've been buying a lot of other kinds of industries that aren't tobacco. Maybe their long-term game plan is move to marijuana and other kinds of consumer products. And I don't know. What do you think their agenda is?
Well, there's no question that the tobacco industries have been diversifying. I mean, R.J. Reynolds bought, it was either Kraft or Nabisco, I don't know, 15 years ago, and Philip Morris bought the other one. I can't remember who bought which, but two of the world's largest food companies were bought by two of the world's largest tobacco companies. And subsequently, they've divested themselves of those two companies. But there's no question that that the conglomeration that's happened in industry as a whole has also happened within tobacco and food. And so I do think that these unifocal industries are looking to diversify.
What do you think the agenda is with this institute? Are you going to take the money?
It hasn't come up yet because no faculty members asked for any money. It's in that ambiguous realm where the money is being
And that's
given
the
by
interesting realm. We have that in
Yeah.
journalism all
Yeah.
the time.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of money we don't take that others do. We're not for profit. But I have to be honest with you. I would take that money. Even though I would believe they're up to a larger goal I don't like, it feels very different from me from them wanting the study to be corrupted.
Well, we'll cross the bridge when we come to it. I don't actually, it's a brand new foundation. I know very little about it. I just know that this is on our horizon as one of those. It's money that comes from tobacco profits, but it's being doled out by a foundation that's completely independent and looking to actually reduce tobacco and smoke contamination in our environment. So we'll figure it out. I mentioned it as one of these gray zones. Accepting money from the tobacco industry is not a gray zone, and we would never do that.
And Linda Bergoni King writes in, thank you for having Dean Vermund on the show. Well, thank you for checking in, and it's been our pleasure. We're about to wrap up, but Dean, how long have you been here in New Haven?
I've been here 18 months.
18 months, but your son was already here as an optometrist?
No, he was living in Houston, Texas, and looking to relocate. And when he found his parents were moving to Connecticut, we were thrilled that he thought he'd come back home because he was born in New York City and has spent his childhood
Wow,
there.
isn't that wonderful?
So this is not so far from home as you might think for us.
Yeah, boy, that is so nice. And you know what? I'm going to have to ask you for a rain check. We never got the pills, meaning opioids and guns. Will you come back sometime?
It'd be a great pleasure.
We
Great pleasure.
barely got off the sofa. But, you know, it's so interesting talking to you. It really has been fascinating. So there's a lot we could talk about.
It's a pleasure,
again.
Paul. Thanks for doing this program. All of us in New Haven really value it.
All right, well, you have an open invitation.
Thank you.
You can come back in that chair, and there'll be tea there again with no sugar, unless you want it. And thank you for joining us today on WNHA-FM's Public Dateline New Haven. Thanks to our guest, Yale Public Health School Dean Sten Vermund, and thanks to Yale New Haven Hospital for providing support for today's program. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD A Plea for Peace. Now, we know what it's like to be free. We just got to remember to book our flight. Fly free with us all day and all night long here at WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.